His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, but most famously known as Caligula. He was born August 31st, 12 AD, and ruled as emperor from AD 37 through 41. My research indicates this was the early imperial era, taking the throne at only 24 years of age.
Caligula was the son of Germanicus, a hero of the German campaign, and Agrippina, the granddaughter of Emperor Augustus.
Some historians speculate Caligula's uncle Tiberius played an instrumental role in the death of Caligula's mother Agrippina, and also his brothers. Some even speculate Tiberius was directly connected to the death of Caligula's father as well, since Caligula and his sisters were of no immediate threat. They were spared. Shortly after the death of his family, he moved to the Isle of Capri to be raised by Tiberius, who then became the Roman emperor who ruled from AD 14 to AD 37. Such brutality on the island of Capri that savage behavior was normalized to him. Tiberius surrounded Caligula with corruption and excess. Suetonius, an early Roman historian, wrote,
"Even in those days, Caligula could not control his natural brutality. He loved watching tortures, executions, and, disguised in wig and robe, abandoned himself nightly to the pleasures of feasting and scandalous living."
Caligula lived in the geographic regions of Capri and Rome his entire life. Tiberius was his adopted father, and, as custom in the aristocratic families, Caligula most likely received an education from tutors, probably Greek, and most likely they were slaves to Tiberius. Other than that, Caligula has no other notable mentors. If you took 30 seconds to look up cruelest Roman emperor online, you will see Caligula's name plastered all over. Several theorists and historians suggest that Caligula had a combination of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder. However, some only regard him as a horrendous tyrant. Whatever the case may be, historians reported that Caligula fell seriously ill due to a brain fever soon after he became emperor. He got better, but never returned to his old self. His behavior and personality significantly altered. Almost every historian who wrote anything on Caligula said that he was the most insane emperor of all time. The public loved Caligula's father Germanicus and hated Tiberius so strongly they expected great things from Caligula. He was truly loved in the first 6 months of his emperorship. But after his sickness, Caligula started killing his relatives and declaring himself a god. He executed his 2 sisters and his father-in-law, but spared his uncle to keep him as a laughingstock. He even murdered his cousin Tiberius Gemellus to seize the money that Tiberius left for him. His view of himself was very high. An example of this is that he pushed to erect a statue of himself in the Jerusalem temple. Thankfully, this incident was aborted. Many exegetes think this was alluded to in 2 Thessalonians 3-4. Caligula's push to become a god is a perfect example of the dark side of hubris. His personality began to shift and become even more erratic. His mind was a maze that never had an exit, and his decisions reflected it. Suetonius recorded that Caligula loved his horse Incitatus so much that he gave his horse a marble stall, ivory manger, a jeweled collar, and even a house. Another chronicler wrote later that his servants fed the steed a mix of oats with gold flakes. Caligula is even reported to have almost appointed his horse as the consul. In his book, Caligula, a Biography, Alois Winterling explains that this insanity wasn't the only explanation for this absurd stunt. He says Caligula was making a point to
humiliate and insult the elites and people in high office.
By bestowing a high public office to his horse, Caligula was saying that senators and officials' work was so meaningless that even a horse could do it. Nevertheless, Caligula's personality took delight in humiliating the Senate, saying that he could make anyone the consul, even the horse. Caligula was eager to witness tortures and executions. He dressed in a wig to go out and revel and party. Caligula was known for being exuberant, as some would say. As Caligula celebrated the first 3 months of his power, he marked a celebration with altars and blazing torches and hordes of people. He celebrated by having more than 160,000 animals slain as sacrifices. He began his rule by gaining the respect of his followers, being kind to everyone, and then he quickly began to misuse his power. Caligula's brutality grew and grew until eventually he was murdered by his own bodyguards, all due to his tragedy of character. 6 months of his reign, he recalled unfair exiles, abolished many taxes Tiberius put into effect. He was generous and even gave gifts to people just for their cooperation. He aided those who lost property in fires. One of his best accomplishments was that he restored the practice of democratic elections. In 40 AD, Caligula expanded the Roman Empire to Mauritania. But due to his generosity in canceling of taxes, the imperial fund was squandered. According to Cassius Dio, a financial crisis emerged in 39, but Suetonius is reported the crisis to begin in 38. Caligula's exuberance exhausted the state treasury. Historians recorded many of Caligula's desperate attempts, such as falsely accusing, fining, and executing citizens on false claims just to apprehend their estate, auctioning the lives of gladiators at shows, asking the people to loan the state money, making ridiculous taxes for people who are or have been prostitutes, part of the guard, or anything sold in the city. He changed wills that left items to Tiberius to becoming possessions of Caligula instead. Centurions who acquired property by plunder had to turn over their possessions to the state all of a sudden. A brief famine broke out. Suetonius has recorded that this was due to Caligula seizing carriages. This disturbed the grain import because Caligula repurposed the grain boats for a pontoon bridge. Even though Rome was bankrupt, Caligula embarked on many extravagant construction projects, such as completing the Temple of Augustus and the Theater of Pompey. He began building an amphitheater beside Scapia. He expanded the imperial palace. He began the aqueducts Aqua Claudia and Anio Novus. He built a large racetrack labeled the Circus of Gaius and Nero. He had an Egyptian obelisk known as the Vatican obelisk transported and erected in the middle of Rome. He repaired city walls, temples, and even built new roads. He continued to plan extravagant structures that would have left people to marvel at centuries later. However, Caligula's life was cut short. I believe his most incredible stunt was that he engineered a floating bridge constructed out of pontoons. This stretched over 2 miles from the resort of Baiae to the port of Puteoli. Caligula rode his beloved horse, Incitatus, across wearing the breastplate of Alexander the Great.
Thyreus of Mendes, who was Tiberius' soothsayer, said that Caligula had
no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae.
Caligula's hubris drove him to do just that.
Caligula left a mixed legacy for people to read about and ponder in this day and age. If it wasn't for his sickness, would all those lives he put to death have been spared? Was it his sickness that had turned his personality into such ugliness, or was it the trauma he experienced when he was a child? Could he have redeemed himself? Or was his heart too entrenched in the darkness? We may never know. All we know are the facts, and the facts say that Caligula was a cruel and tyrannical emperor who murdered millions, wasted money, and eventually in AD 41 was murdered himself by his own guard, those sworn to protect him. The mark he left on history, although a gruesome one, leaves us an example of what not to do. I believe this affects people today because we can look at a tyrannical leaders such as Caligula and be grateful that we don't live in a society where one dictator can cause the death of thousands of innocent lives. Thank you for Thank you for taking the time and interest to learn about Caligula. With that, I hope you have a successful dead week and your finals go smoothly. Thank you very much.